Accordia, my friends, there are places along the Irish coast where the land feels unfinished. Places where the Atlantic, for example, is still arguing with the shore, where cliffs collapse grain by grain into water, the white horsed water, where storms redraw beaches overnight, where salt and wind spend centuries wearing stone into new shapes. If you stand long enough on any part of Ireland's coast, be it a headland in Donegal, Donegal, beside the Atlantic, coast of Kerry, or looking west from Clare, County on Clore, into the darkening ocean, you begin to realise something. The people who lived beside the coastline were listening to that argument, as they call it, going on for thousands of years. And they answered it with names, sometimes decorative, sometimes even romantic, sometimes names of warning, names of memory, names of grief, names of survival. Poll Báite, the drowned pool. Squilt na Lunga, the split of the ship. Carraig na Lunga, the rock of the ship. Port na Marbh, the harbour of the dead. In Ireland, the sea has never just been about scenery and scenery alone. The sea fed people. It filled nets. It carried herring, mackerel, cod into harbours that became towns and then cities. It connected Ireland to abroad, to Spain, to France, to America, to the wider world beyond the horizon. But the sea also took. It took boats, it took coastlines, it took fathers and sons, entire crews who vanished into the Atlantic weather before dawn. It carried storms inland, storms like An Gorta Mór, the night of the big wind in 1839, when winds tore roofs from houses, wrecked boats along the coast, and left such a mark on the memory and folklore that for generations afterwards people dated events by whether they happened before or after that storm. And for centuries, the coastline in Ireland became a thing of living archive for all of this. The dangerous places were named, the drowned places were named, the safe harbours were named, the rocks that could split a hull open in winter darkness were named. Long before modern charts, long before GPS, the coastline itself became a spoken map. A fisherman mourning his son, a sailor remembering a dangerous spot, a community carrying survival instructions inside language itself. And the sea did more than shape the land. It shaped Irish history. Every invasion first appeared on the horizon. The mythical arrivals from thousands of years ago came by sea. The Vikings themselves came by sea. The Normans came by sea. The ships of the Spanish Armada shattered against the Western rocks. French ships arrived during the rebellion of 1798, carrying soldiers, weapons, and hope for the rebels. And then in the 19th century, something changed. For generations, Irish people feared what might arrive from the sea, but prior to, during, and after An Gorta Mór, the sea became the only road left out. Hundreds of thousands stood at quays in places like Cove and in Dublin, watching Ireland disappear behind them into the mist. Some, and indeed most, would never return. And maybe this is why so many Irish coastal names feel a little bit haunted, because they're not simply descriptions of geography, although they can be. They're also record of encounters between people and bodies of water, records of wrecks, of crossings, of departures, of bodies recovered from storms, of strangers arriving over the horizon, of families leaving forever. In Ireland, the coastline is not simply the edge of the country, it's where Ireland kept its memories. In this episode of Undercover Irish Accordia, we're going to follow those memories around the shore. In previous episodes, we've looked at Lug Anamnacha, place names, and we've looked at it from a number of different aspects. I like to think that Ireland and her people have been in a conversation with the bodies of water that surround her for hundreds and indeed thousands of years. And in today's episode, we're going to explore that conversation. Carja, you're listening to Undercover Irish, podcast where we uncover Ireland's hidden curriculum. Together, Carja, Eraigling le Céile. Regardless of the season or the time of year that you look out at the Irish Ocean from the coastline, there's a beauty involved in it, whether it is flat and calm on a beautiful sunny day or wild, like the wild Atlantic coast, for example. During winter, it appears with great beauty. And for most of Irish history, the coastline has not just been about having a backdrop to a picture or a video. It was something that people negotiated with every single day, and particularly along that aforementioned Atlantic edge, from Donegal, Doonangaul, down through Mayo, Galway, Clare, County on Clore, Kerry, County Kerry, and down to my own Cork, Carraig. The western coastline of Ireland is not gentle water meeting land usually. It's cliffs, currents, fog, sudden weather, narrow inlets, shifting sandbanks, and winter storms rolling in from an ocean with nothing between Ireland and North America. And over centuries, people learned to read that coastline almost like a text. And so they named the dangerous places. They also named the safe places. They named the rocks that could split a hull apart and the places where boats could shelter from the weather. And all around the coast, those names still survive. Take one, for example, up in Donegal, Tír Chonaill, Doonangaul. This particular place that I'm talking about was anglicised as Scoilt na Linga, and as Gaeilge in Irish it is Scoilt na Linga. The split or the cleft of the ship. Even today the name sounds almost violent, but certainly carries a warning with it. You can imagine Atlantic water driving through a narrow crack in the rocks while generations of sailors tried to navigate around it in darkness or fog. Nearby, there's another place, as Gaeilge, known as Scoilt na Marnélach. Scoilt na Marnélach. Now this is possibly the sailor's cleft. Again, the coastline preserving human experience inside the language and inside the language that we speak in terms of Gaeilge, but in terms of the language expressing something around the feature of this. It's not just abstract geography, it's about working geography. Places remembered because they were important and there was an importance around them. It may have been a warning, it may have been a description. Elsewhere along the coastline you have names like Carraig na Loinge, Carraig na Loinge, the rock of the ship. So Carraig is something that again you would see commonly in most place names. But in this case it's on the coast, Carraig na Loinge. You also have Carraig an Ancra, the rock of the anchor. These names feel practical because they were practical. Before modern navigation systems, before electronic charts, before lighthouses even, along much of the coast, people navigated through memory, through knowledge, particularly oral knowledge. A fisherman might know a particular offshore rock by its shape. A sailor might use a sea stack to line up a safe entry point into a harbour. A family might pass warnings from one generation to the next, O Gluin go Gluin, through place names alone. And often the names themselves tell you exactly what people feared, as we've touched on in the last two episodes. In several coastal areas, there are places called An Poll Báite. An Poll Báite, the drowned pool. The word Báite comes and changes the atmosphere immediately. Drowned, submerged, soaked, lost beneath water. Maybe these were tidal hollows, maybe they were sea caves, maybe deep pools hidden beneath Atlantic surf. But whatever the original landscape looked like, the important thing is this: people named the danger so they would be remembered. It would be a warning into the future. Now, not every name is fearful. Along the Waterford coast, Port Lorga, there is Trá na Máid, the boat strand. Very straightforward, beautiful working name, the strand of the boats. You can almost see the life inside it, currachs dragged above the tide line almost, nets drying in salt wind. Children waiting for boats to return before dusk, because that's what coastal communities were like. The sea was a livelihood as much as a threat. Fishing shaped entire settlements, weather shaped entire calendars. The Atlantic decided when people worked, travelled, traded, and stayed trapped ashore. And every now and then, the sea reminded people just how fragile life beside it could be. One of the most destructive storms in Irish recorded memory, which we mentioned in the opening intro, was 1849. An Gorta Mór, the night of the big wind. All across Ireland, destruction happened. Trees were uprooted, boats were destroyed in harbours. And along the coast especially, communities experienced something they already understood deep down. The sea does not belong to the people, no matter how long they live beside it. That's why these names are really, really important. Because these coastal names, they are accumulated memory. Warnings preserved in Irish, fragments of local knowledge, small acts of survival fixed into the landscape itself. It's the coastline speaking through the people who lived there. And while that conversation, the people living in these coastal areas, describing the land, naming the land, is really, really important, and it portrays that relationship they had with the land. Sometimes the edge of Ireland, the coastline, turned into something different, because every community looking out from these harbours, these coastlines, eventually learned another truth. The sea doesn't only take things away, it also brought things in. New people, new languages, new gods, new armies. And almost every major turning point in Irish history first appeared as something small and distant on the horizon, a sail.
Finding great candidates to hire can be like, well, trying to find a needle in a haystack. Sure, you can post your job to some job board, but then all you can do is hope the right person comes along. Which is why you should try ZipRecruiter for free at ziprecruiter.com/zip. ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you. It finds them for you. Its powerful technology identifies people with the right experience and actively invites them to apply to your job. You get qualified candidates fast. So while other companies might deliver a lot of hay, ZipRecruiter finds you what you're looking for. The needle in the haystack.
See why 4 out of 5 employers who post a job on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free at ziprecruiter.com/zip. That's ziprecruiter.com/zip. ziprecruiter.com/zip.
The sea, oh the sea, Grá Galma Cree, long may it roll between England and me. It's a sure guarantee that somehow we'll be free. Thank God we're surrounded by water. An extract from a song that might be familiar to some listeners, taking a kind of a humorous approach to recognising the sea around Ireland as a political defence. And for thousands of years, people living along the Irish coast understood something that can be easy to forget when we look at a map today. While the author of that song desired separation using the sea in reality did not separate Ireland from the world. It connected Ireland to the world. Long before motorways or railways, the fastest way into Ireland and out of it was by water. And because of that, almost every major turning point in Irish history arrived first by sea. Even Irish mythology imagines the island this way. In the medieval Lower Gabála Éireann, the Book of Invasions, Ireland is described through wave after wave of arrivals. The island is approached from the horizon repeatedly, new peoples landing, claiming territory, disappearing, and returning again. In a strange way, even the mythology imagines Ireland as something encountered from the water first. Beyond the western coastline lay another kind of crossing entirely, the otherworld. In Irish tradition, old Irish tradition, the sea was not empty space, it was a threshold, a place where ordinary reality gave way to something older and stranger. That survives even now in names like Mannin Bay, Cuan Vannon, along the Galway coast, a place that still carries echoes of Manannán, MacLear, the sea god, shapeshifter, guardian of crossings, ferryman between worlds. And further north, beyond the Donegal coast, lies Tory Island, Torrig, an island wrapped in stories of Balor, of the evil eye, and the Fomorian supernatural beings associated with darkness, storm, and the sea itself. So even in mythology, danger approached Ireland across water. And then eventually, history did too. From the late 8th century onward, sails began appearing regularly along the coastline. Viking sails. Longships entering river mouths and sheltered bays all around the island. At first they came as raiders, monasteries burned along the coast, settlements attacked, communities watched unfamiliar ships emerge suddenly from the sea. But over time the Vikings became something more permanent. They settled, they traded, they built towns, Dublin, Waterford, Wexford, Limerick, and more. Some of Ireland's major coastal cities still carry the imprint of those Norse arrivals, and in some places so do the names themselves. Along the coastline survive traces of Old Norse words woven into Irish geography. Names ending in Vik, V-I-K, or Wick, W-I-K, means bays or inlets. Places like Smerrick in Kerry, County Cheery, or Helvick in Waterford, Portlauriga. Again, the coastline being named by sailors trying to understand shelter, danger, and navigation. Different languages, but often the same instincts. Find safe water, avoid hidden rocks, memorize the coastline, and respect the water. And the arrivals kept coming. In 1169, Norman ships arrived and landed on the southeast coast. Centuries later, the ships of the Spanish Armada wrecked themselves against the western seaboard, scattering survivors across Ireland's Atlantic edge. And then, in 1798, came French ships carrying troops, weapons, and revolutionary hope in support of Irish rebellion. Again and again, Irish history first appeared as sails on the horizon, sometimes bringing trade, sometimes bringing conquest and colonialism, sometimes bringing ideas that would reshape the country forever. And all the while, the coast itself continued recording these encounters in its names: harbours, anchorages, landing places, shipwrecks, dangerous channels. Fragments of maritime memory fixed permanently into the landscape. Because if initially we were talking about survival, this part of the coastline story is about encounter. Ireland meeting the wider world at the island's edge. And at that island's edge, for centuries people of Ireland watched the sea for what might arrive across it. Raiders, traders, invaders, armies, storms. But in the 19th century, a change occurs. The direction of movement reversed, and the sea becomes the road out. During An Gorta Mór, the Great Hunger, harbours that once connected Ireland to trade and occupation through empire became places of separation, places of farewell, places where families stood on quaysides watching ships pull away into the Atlantic fog or travelling in the direction of Liverpool, Larfel, not knowing if they would ever see one another again. All around the coast, certain harbours became permanently tied to that memory, none more so than Cove. For generations, Cove in County Cork, known for a long period thanks to the audacity of colonisation as Queenstown, believe it or not, in honour of English Queen Victoria. This became one of the great departure points of Irish immigration. Hundreds of thousands passed through the harbour, leaving for seasonal work, some fleeing poverty, some fleeing starvation, some believing that they might return, but most never did. And standing there today looking out across Cove and back into Cork Harbour, it's difficult not to feel the weight of absence attached to the place. Because emigration changes landscapes. Not physically at first, but emotionally. The harbour remains, the sea remains, the boats continue moving. But entire generations disappear beyond the horizon. And all along the Irish coast, there are places where that feeling still lingers. Dún Líra becomes another major crossing point. Mail packets, steamships, workers crossing regularly between Ireland and over to Britain. The sea that once carried Viking longships and Norman fleets now carries commuters, labourers, emigrants, and letters home. And even the language of the coast changed with it. Steam packet quays, ferry terminals, departure points. The old maritime world becoming industrialised, mechanised, faster, but no less emotional, because departure leaves marks too. Perhaps especially in an island country, there's something psychologically powerful about watching land disappear behind you. And for countless emigrants leaving Ireland, the final image of home was not of a road or a railway station, but it was the coastline. Headlands fading into mist, harbour lights shrinking behind them, the edge of Ireland slowly dissolving into the Atlantic weather. And in many ways, the sea became both tragedy and survival at the same time here. The same water that isolated communities during An Gorta Mór also carried people towards possibility. The same Atlantic that had wrecked ships along the western coast became the route towards America, Canada, Britain, Australia, a destroyer and an escape. And perhaps that contradiction explains why the Irish relationship with the sea feels so emotionally complicated even now. Because the sea fed people, it buried people, it separated families, but it connected generations across oceans. And eventually Irish identity began stretching far beyond the coastline, across shipping routes, across emigrant networks, across the Atlantic world. But still the names remained behind. The harbours, the coves, the anchorages, the dangerous rocks, the coastline keeping memory long after the people had gone. And sometimes a name remains kind of frozen in time. And I'm thinking about World's End. World's End in Cion Táille, because before, so much of what we know about modern history and geography was part of common knowledge. People called World's End at Cion Táille World's End because it felt like the end of the world. And that's a name that sticks right through to today. So, Accordia, in this episode of Undercover Irish, we've looked at the relationship between Ireland and her coast, and more specifically, the land and the sea, through the lens of the people that experienced it. Irish coastal names endure powerfully. They do so because they do not feel invented. They feel inherited, passed carefully from O'Gluin to Gluin, as I say, from one generation standing at the water's edge to the next. An Poll Báite, the drowned pool. Port na Marbh, the harbour of the dead. Carraig na Loinge, the rock of the ship. These ones that we've looked at in this episode. They're small fragments of memory left behind by people trying to understand the coastline around them and their place beside it. Because for thousands of years, the Irish coastline was never simply the edge of the country. It was a meeting point between land and sea, between Ireland and the wider world, between danger and survival. between departure and return. And even now, if you stand along the coast long enough, as I said, in Donegal or in Carraig, or looking west from Connemara, wherever you may be, as evening weather rolls in, you can still feel and see that old conversation continuing between the land, the sea, and the people. Carja, if you've enjoyed this episode of Undercover Irish, please leave a review. Do share it with a friend. And if you want to support this podcast on Patreon, go to Patreon and look up Undercover Irish. At the moment, we're looking at Loganimnacha place names and putting a broader structure around them and looking at them in different ways. If you enjoyed this episode, please look back on some of the previous ones. You may enjoy them as well. But for now, a Carja, Gorta Míle Maithreacht Osocht Fellum on this particular episode. Thank you so much for being with me. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did bringing it to you. Until the next time, a Carja, Slán go fóill, agus Berigi Bua.